The locker room door swung open 40 minutes before the bell. 3 men in tailored suits walked in without knocking, and behind them, moving slowly with his cane and trademark cigar, came Colonel Tom Parker. Elvis Presley looked up from wrapping his hands, sweat already dampening his dark hair, and felt his stomach drop. He knew that look on the colonel's face. That wasn't the look of a manager coming to wish his fighter good luck. That was the look of a man who'd already made a deal and was now here to collect. "Elvis, my boy," the colonel said, his Dutch accent thicker than usual, always a sign he was nervous. "We need to talk, privately." It was November 1973, and Elvis Presley wasn't just the king of rock and roll anymore. For the past 8 months, he'd been training for something nobody believed he could do, a legitimate boxing comeback at age 38. Not a publicity stunt, not a celebrity exhibition, a real fight, sanctioned by the Nevada State Athletic Commission against a ranked light heavyweight contender named Tommy the Hammer Morrison. The whole world thought Elvis had lost his mind. His doctor said his heart couldn't take it. His ex-wife Priscilla begged him not to risk his life. His fans worried this was another sign of his spiral. But Elvis had something to prove, not to them, but to himself. He was tired of being controlled, tired of being told what to sing, where to perform, how to live. In the ring there were no scripts, no colonel telling him what to do. Just 2 men, their skill, and the truth. "Colonel, I've got 30 minutes until fight time," Elvis said, his voice steady despite the anxiety creeping up his spine. "Whatever this is, it can wait." "No, son, it cannot wait." The colonel gestured to his 3 companions. "These gentlemen represent some very important business interests. They've invested heavily in tonight's event, and they have a simple request." Elvis stood slowly, his 6-foot frame still imposing despite the extra weight he'd dropped for the fight. He'd gotten down to 178 pounds, the leanest he'd been in a decade. Every morning at 5 a.m., road work. Every afternoon, sparring. Every evening, studying film. He'd given 8 months of his life to this moment. And now, 40 minutes before the bell, he was about to find out why the colonel had really supported this crazy idea. "What kind of request?" Elvis asked, though he already knew. He'd been around long enough to recognize the type of men standing in his locker room. Expensive suits couldn't hide what they were. The largest of the 3 men stepped forward. He had dead eyes and a smile that never reached them. "Mr. Presley, you're a smart man, so I'll be direct. There's a lot of money riding on this fight. The odds are currently even money, which is surprising given your opponent's record. Some people have taken substantial positions expecting a certain outcome." Elvis felt his trainer Charlie Hodge tense beside him. Charlie had been with Elvis since the Army days. He'd seen everything, and he knew when trouble walked through the door. "You want me to throw the fight?" Elvis said flatly. "It wasn't a question. We prefer to think of it as an investment in your future," the man continued smoothly. "You take a dive in the 8th round, make it look good, nobody gets hurt, and you walk away with $500,000, tax-free, cash. Plus, your career continues without any complications. Everybody wins." The room fell silent, except for the distant roar of the crowd gathering in the arena above them. Elvis could feel 15,000 people waiting, could feel the weight of 8 months of sacrifice, could feel something deeper, the question of who he really was when nobody was watching, when nobody was telling him what to do. "And if I say no?" Elvis asked quietly. The colonel stepped forward, placing a hand on Elvis's shoulder with paternal affection that suddenly felt like a threat. "Elvis, my boy, let's be reasonable. You're 38 years old. You have no business being in a boxing ring with a professional fighter. Morrison will destroy you if this goes the distance. These gentlemen are offering you a way to save face, make money, and walk out of here with your health intact. It's the smart play." But Elvis was looking at the colonel differently now, seeing past the folksy charm and the decades of manipulation to something ugly underneath. "How long have you known about this, Colonel?" The colonel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Business is business, son. I've always looked out for your interests." "My interests," Elvis repeated slowly. "Or your gambling debts." The room temperature seemed to drop. One of the suited men shifted uncomfortably. Charlie Hodge moved closer to Elvis's side. The colonel's grip on Elvis's shoulder tightened slightly. "Careful, Elvis," the colonel said, his voice losing its warmth. "You're upset. You're nervous about the fight. You're not thinking clearly." But Elvis had never thought more clearly in his life. Suddenly, everything made sense. The colonel's enthusiastic support for the boxing comeback when everyone else thought it was suicide. The careful choice of opponent, ranked but vulnerable. The massive promotion, the television deal, the unprecedented betting action. The colonel had set this up from the beginning, had sold Elvis out before he'd even thrown a punch. "Get out," Elvis said quietly. "Elvis, be reasonable. I said get out." Elvis's voice rose, the famous Presley charisma, replaced by something harder, something that reminded everyone in that room that he'd grown up fighting in the streets of Tupelo and Memphis. "All of you, get out of my locker room, now." The three suited men looked at each other, then at the colonel. The largest one stepped forward again, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Mr. Presley, you're making a very serious mistake. People who disappoint my employers tend to have unfortunate accidents, career-ending injuries, unexpected tax audits, problems with concert venues, mysteriously canceling contracts. You understand what I'm saying?" Elvis stood his ground, though his heart was hammering. This was it. This was the moment. Either he was going to be controlled for the rest of his life, or he was going to fight for his freedom, right here, right now, before he even entered the ring. "I understand perfectly," Elvis said, his voice steady. "You're threatening me, in my own locker room, 40 minutes before the biggest fight of my life, and you're doing it because you think I'm the same kid who signed away his life to Colonel Parker 20 years ago. But here's what you don't understand." Elvis stepped closer to the man, close enough to see his own reflection in those dead eyes. "I gave up 3 years of my life serving my country when I could have stayed a civilian. I walked away from Hollywood when they wanted to turn me into a joke. I've faced down crowds that wanted to kill me for the way I moved my hips. I've been called everything from the Antichrist, to a communist, to a degenerate, and I'm still here, still standing. So if you think your threats scare me, if you think I'm going to betray everything I've worked for these past 8 months because you wave some money around, then you don't know who you're dealing with." The room was electric. Charlie Hodge looked like he was ready to fight all 4 men himself. The colonel's face had gone pale. The suited men looked uncertain for the first time. "Furthermore," Elvis continued, his voice growing stronger, "I want you to understand something. There are 15,000 people in that arena right now, millions watching on television, reporters from every major newspaper and magazine. If anything, and I mean anything, happens to me, to my family, to my career, that looks even slightly suspicious, I will hold the biggest press conference this country has ever seen, and I will tell them everything, about this conversation, about who tried to fix this fight, about who's really behind it, and then we'll see whose career ends, and who goes to prison." It was a bluff, partially. Elvis didn't have proof of anything except this conversation, but he had something more powerful: his fame, his platform, his voice, and these men knew it. In 1973, Muhammad Ali had just proven that athletes could challenge the system and win. The public was ready to believe that sports could be corrupt. One press conference from Elvis Presley could bring down a lot of important people. The large man stared at Elvis for a long moment, calculation visible behind those dead eyes. Then he smiled, a genuine smile this time, one that held something like respect. "You know what, Mr. Presley? Maybe we made a mistake. Maybe you really are the king." He turned to the colonel. "Your boy's got balls. I'll give him that." The 3 men left without another word, leaving Elvis alone with the colonel and Charlie. The silence stretched out, heavy with 20 years of history, of manipulation, of control, of a relationship that had just been irrevocably broken. "Elvis," the colonel started, but Elvis held up his hand. "How much?" Elvis asked quietly. "How much did you owe them?" The colonel's shoulders sagged slightly. For the first time in 2 decades, he looked old. 200,000, maybe a little more. "The casinos, the gambling, it got away from me, and they said if I could guarantee the outcome." "You sold me out for $200,000, Elvis said, and there was something like wonder in his voice. 20 years, Colonel. 20 years I've made you millions, tens of millions, and you sold me out for pocket change." "It wasn't like that, Elvis. I was trying to protect you. If you lose this fight legitimately, it destroys your image. But if you take the dive, at least you walk away with money, and you get your debts cleared," Elvis finished. "While I live the rest of my life knowing I was a fraud, knowing I gave up the one honest thing I've ever tried to do." He shook his head. "Get out, Colonel. We're done. After tonight, after I win or lose in that ring, we're done. Find yourself another meal ticket." The colonel's face cycled through emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally something that might have been genuine sadness. "Elvis, you don't mean that. We're a team. We've always been a team." "No, Colonel. You've always been in control, and I've always been your product. But not anymore. Now get out. I have a fight to prepare for." The colonel left without another word, and suddenly Elvis was alone with Charlie in the locker room. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of what he'd just done. In 40 minutes, he was going to face a professional boxer who'd won 23 of his 27 fights. But somehow, that seemed less terrifying than what he'd just faced in this room. "Boss," Charlie said quietly, "that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. But you know they're going to come after you now, right? The mob doesn't forget." Elvis sat down heavily on the bench, suddenly feeling every one of his 38 years. "Then let them come, Charlie. At least I'll lose on my feet instead of on my knees." He looked up at his old friend. "Finish wrapping my hands. I've got a fight to win." 30 minutes later, Elvis Presley walked through the tunnel to the sold-out arena. The roar that greeted him was deafening. 15,000 people on their feet, screaming his name. Not because of a song, not because of a movie, because of what he was about to attempt. Camera flashes exploded like lightning. Reporters shouted questions. Security struggled to keep the crowd back. But as Elvis climbed through the ropes and into the ring, as he saw Tommy Morrison across from him, loose and confident, 15 years younger and infinitely more experienced, as he felt the hot lights and heard the referee giving final instructions, something unexpected happened. Elvis wasn't scared. He was free. For the first time in 20 years, nobody owned him. Nobody controlled him. Win or lose, this was his choice, his fight, his moment. The bell rang. Morrison came out fast, testing Elvis with a quick jab. Elvis slipped it, feeling muscle memory from months of training take over. Another jab, another slip. Morrison was faster than anyone Elvis had sparred with, his punches crisp and professional. But Elvis had been studying Morrison's film for months. He knew the patterns, knew the tells. Morrison liked to work the body, set up the headshot. Elvis kept his guard tight, circling left, staying out of range. The first round was feeling out process. Morrison landed a few jabs, testing Elvis's defense. Elvis landed almost nothing but didn't get hit clean. When the bell rang, he returned to his corner feeling like he'd survived. Charlie worked quickly, giving him water, wiping sweat. "You're doing good, boss. He's faster than you, but you're reading him right. Stay patient. Your moment will come." The second round was harder. Morrison found his range, landed a solid combination to Elvis's body that drove the air from his lungs. Elvis clinched, buying time, feeling the professional strength of a real fighter. This wasn't sparring anymore. This was real. Morrison was really trying to hurt him. The thought was oddly exhilarating. By the fourth round, Elvis was breathing hard, his body screaming. Morrison had landed dozens of shots, none devastating, but accumulating damage. Elvis's left eye was swelling. His ribs ached. Charlie looked worried between rounds. "Elvis, you've proven your point. You can stop this anytime. Nobody would blame you." But Elvis shook his head. "Not yet, Charlie. I didn't come this far to quit." The fifth round changed everything. Morrison, confident now, got careless. He threw a wild right hook, putting too much into it. Elvis slipped inside, years of studying film paying off, and landed a perfect left hook to Morrison's body. The shot was clean, placed exactly where it needed to be, and Morrison's eyes widened in surprise and pain. Elvis followed with a right hand to the head. Not the hardest punch, but placed perfectly on Morrison's temple. Morrison stumbled backward, and for the first time, Elvis saw uncertainty in his opponent's eyes. The crowd went insane. The next 3 rounds were war. Morrison, hurt but professional, fought back hard. Elvis, tasting possibility, pressed forward despite exhaustion. They traded punches in the center of the ring, neither willing to back down. Blood mixed with sweat. The crowd was on their feet, screaming themselves hoarse. In the 8th round, the round where Elvis was supposed to take his dive, he found himself pinned in the corner. Morrison launched a vicious combination, trying to finish it. Elvis covered up, rode out the storm, and when Morrison paused for breath, Elvis saw his opening. He threw everything he had into one perfect combination. Left hook to the body, right uppercut to the chin, left hook to the head. Morrison went down. The arena exploded into sound that seemed to shake the building's foundation. The referee started counting. Morrison was trying to rise, game to the end, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. At 8, he made it to one knee. At 9, he tried to stand. At 10, the referee waved it off. Elvis Presley, at 38 years old, 8 months after deciding to chase an impossible dream, had just knocked out a ranked professional boxer. What happened next became legend. Elvis didn't celebrate, didn't raise his arms in victory. Instead, he walked to where Morrison was being helped to his feet by his corner, and embraced him. "You're a hell of a fighter," Elvis said, loud enough for the front row to hear. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Morrison, dazed but respectful, nodded. "You earned it, King. Every bit of it." The post-fight press conference was chaos. Reporters couldn't believe what they'd witnessed. Questions flew like punches. "Elvis, how does it feel to win at 38? "It feels like freedom," Elvis answered simply. "Will you fight again?" "No. This was what I needed to prove. That I could do something real, something honest, on my own terms. Now I can go back to music knowing that I'm nobody's puppet." "What about Colonel Parker? We heard there was an argument before the fight." Elvis paused, choosing his words carefully. "The Colonel and I have parted ways. That's all I'll say about that. But the boxing world knew there was more to the story. Rumors spread quickly about the fix that wasn't, about Elvis's refusal to take the dive, about his confrontation with mob figures. The Nevada Gaming Commission launched an investigation. Several prominent bookmakers were questioned. The Colonel disappeared from public life. 3 weeks after the fight, Elvis received a letter. It was from the large man who'd come to his locker room, written on expensive stationery with no return address. "Mr. Presley, you surprised us. More importantly, you earned our respect. Your gambling debts have been marked paid in full, and you will have no further trouble from our organization. You proved something that night that we'd forgotten. Some men can't be bought.
That's worth more than any fixed fight. Good luck with your music. You really are the king." Elvis burned the letter, but he never forgot what it represented. He'd stood up to the system, risked everything, and won on his own terms. The colonel tried to reconcile several times over the following months. Elvis refused. He hired a new management team, renegotiated his contracts, took control of his career for the first time in 2 decades. The music changed too. Less controlled, more raw, more honest. Critics called it his best work in years. When Elvis died 4 years later in 1977, the boxing community mourned. Not because he'd been a great fighter, though he'd proven himself respectable, but because he'd embodied something essential about the sport: courage. Not just physical courage, but the moral courage to stand up for what's right when everyone's telling you to take the easy way out. Tommy Morrison, the man Elvis defeated, spoke at his funeral. Elvis could have taken the dive, Morrison told the crowd. He could have walked away with $500,000, and nobody would have known the difference. But he chose to fight for real, to risk getting hurt, to risk losing, because his integrity meant more than money or safety. That's not just a good fighter, that's a good man. The story of Elvis's fight became a parable in boxing circles. When young fighters were approached about fixing fights, their trainers would tell them about the night the king of rock and roll chose honor over money. About the 40 minutes in a locker room that defined a man's character. Because here's what Elvis understood that night, what he proved in 8 brutal rounds. True freedom isn't about doing whatever you want. It's about having the courage to say no when everyone's telling you to say yes. It's about standing up to the people who control you, even when it's terrifying. It's about choosing your principles over your comfort. The colonel had controlled Elvis for 20 years through a combination of manipulation, contract law, and Elvis's own fear of making decisions. But in that locker room, facing down threats and temptation, Elvis finally broke free. And once he'd tasted that freedom, he could never go back. That's the legacy of Elvis Presley's boxing comeback. Not the knockout, though that was impressive. Not the victory, though that was earned. But the moment 40 minutes before the bell when he stood in his locker room and said no to the people who'd controlled him for decades. When he chose integrity over safety, honor over money, freedom over control. Because anybody can throw a punch. Anybody can take a dive. But it takes real courage to stand up and fight for yourself when the entire system is trying to knock you down. Elvis Presley was the king of rock and roll, but on one November night in 1973, in a boxing ring in Las Vegas, he proved he was something more, a man who couldn't be bought, couldn't be controlled, and couldn't be broken. And that's worth more than any championship belt.